Hello, how are you all? Welcome to the Neuroleadership Huddle. I'm Lucas Kanga, and we're going to work on one of the most relevant topics within the field of neuromanagement. Leadership has been a constant subject of recent years in order to make organizations and people function as a single entity, pursuing the results, vision, and mission of companies. And that's why the brain had to be involved in this challenge. We're going to talk about how leadership is actually not associated with a specific area, but its most relevant actions are represented in what is called the frontal cortex or prefrontal cortex, which relates to the area of the brain located closer to the forehead. And this is where what are known as executive capacities or executive functions reside. So, what exactly are executive functions? They are functions located in the prefrontal cortex that define us as humans and set us apart from other animal kingdoms. For example, in order to interact with others, we need to have inhibitory control, be able to make decisions, to choose. Logically, to understand the emotions we have, to control certain emotions and impulses, to be able to calculate, to decide, to manage intuition. And all of that, if you think about it. These are some very high-level functions, and that's why they're located in the prefrontal cortex. When we talk about leadership, linking these abilities to leadership is actually quite straightforward. You need to have control to organize yourself, to plan ahead, and a whole host of other functions that also involve relating to people, understanding them, and adapting your leadership style. To say that leadership is only associated with the prefrontal cortex, that's a bit ambitious, but for the purposes of this course, we're going to understand that leadership involves many executive functions. We're going to define leadership as the ability one has to exert influence over others, to motivate them to pursue certain goals. And if you think about it, this kind of leadership requires executive functions. And in fact, the prefrontal cortex is where these are housed. These executive functions, as you might recall, are found in different systems and in different areas. And that's why we're going to mention some that are particularly relevant. So, which are the key nuclei we need to remember? In terms of where the executive functions are located, there are three main nuclei that are very interesting to know about. There is a nucleus located on the more lateral side of the brain called the dorsolateral, where logical and rational evaluations are generally housed. A little further inwards, in the medial part we will find another, one called the ventromedial, which is the one that allows me to understand both other people's emotions and my own. That is extremely important to understand that there is a part of this ventromedial nucleus that allows me to be empathetic with others, but there is also another part that lets me understand what I am feeling. This marvelous way of distributing these abilities is what makes us human. And we have a third nucleus called the orbitofrontal. It is located between the orbit and the forehead, and it allows us to understand social rules. Imagine a person who doesn't respect social rules, who doesn't know what can or can't be done, or what is acceptable in one country or another. Once we are clear about what some of these nuclei are for and how they are distributed, we are going to associate that and locate it within the organization. Because talking about nuclei in an organization might be a bit complex, but if we conceptualize it within a leadership model, it will be much easier to understand. We're going to talk about a transactional leadership style. The transactional leadership style is basically the relationship a leader has with their subordinate, or leading at a transactional level. In other words, you offer some incentive and in return they should provide you with some value. If you notice, it doesn't require too much emotional or relational behavior, rather it has much more to do with rational or transactional behaviors. That's why we can say that the nucleus it uses most is absolutely explanatory in nature. It's the dorsolateral. We're going to use the ventromedial much less, where everything related to empathic relationships, self-awareness, and understanding others is located. So let's conceptualize about where. Now, let's talk about a second model or style of leadership called transformational leadership. If you notice, transformational leadership requires knowing the person very well. That's why the nucleus we find within the medial or ventromedial part of the brain will be the leader in this concept. Why? because it will have to diagnose. We will have to diagnose who the other person is, how they feel, what they want, what motivates them, why they do it, and be able to apply that knowledge. But it will also have to respect certain rules, some rules of what is called, for example, the organizational climate. So it will also use what is called the orbitofrontal cortex. In this context, we have a leader who is much more focused on knowing themselves and transforming others so that they follow the organization's vision. We will also encounter a third style of leadership, which is actually the denial of leadership, called the laissez-faire leader. Let them do as they please. This is a leader who literally abandons their subordinate. In fact, they neither transact with them, nor do they transform them. This is a rather apathetic leader, a leader who leaves people to their own devices. And one could say, purely for the sake of the lesson, that they abandon and do not use the nuclei. In reality, it is impossible not to use them, but to conceptualize it, we will say that they do not use the nuclei very much. If you notice, we can make this association between leadership styles in areas or systems that we have in our brain. That is why knowing them will have us working under the title of neuroleadership or neuroleadership. What is neuroleadership? It is someone who uses all three nuclei to exercise leadership. Not just one, not two, but all of them, because they are 100% connected. So to summarize what we've seen in this module and in this session, we have the most frontal part, which is the prefrontal cortex. There we house what are called executive functions. These executive functions allow us to decide, plan, make decisions, follow rules, and control our impulses. And above all else, to relate to another human being, and to differentiate ourselves from animals, who have much less of it. Prefrontal control. There we also house the nuclei that enable these functions, and we spoke about three main nuclei. One nucleus is called the ventromedial, which is the one related to knowing my own emotions, and also understanding the emotions of others, the basis of empathy. Another is called the orbitofrontal nucleus, and it is involved in relationships or in following social rules and respecting all those social rules within organizations. And also what is called the dorsolateral, which is more to do with transactional, logical, or rational aspects of my behavior. Once we discussed the nuclei, we talked about leadership styles and some of the relationships they have with these nuclei. The transformational leadership style focuses on diagnosing our team member and adapting their leadership style in order to transform them. For that, they will need to know many of the individual's characteristics, their values, motivations, and attitudes. And for that, they will make extensive use of the ventromedial. Transactional leadership is the kind of leadership that is based on a transaction, where I give you an incentive and you give me something of value in return. The relationship is quite calculated, which is why the dorsolateral is used a bit more. Having said that, we're now ready to say goodbye. Thank you very much for taking part in this class, and we'll see you in future sessions.